Hey, what's going on, everybody? Happy Monday evening here, and we've got a gauntlet of a video ahead of us as we track what is very soon to be Hurricane Idalia in the Gulf of Mexico. So, unfortunately, a very serious situation developing here for our friends down in Florida and even up into sections of the Georgia and Carolina coastline as well. Very likely to be impacted in a very big way by what is looking very likely to be a major hurricane at landfall tomorrow morning. So, again, a lot to unravel in this video, and we're really going to spend just about all of this video on Idalia. I will give you a quick update on current conditions going through tonight and tomorrow in the eastern half of the country, but again, really Idalia is, of course, our big concern, so definitely going to spend a lot of time excuse me, on that. Now, if you are new here and you haven't already subscribed, definitely consider doing so and like the video to help this video really just get out to more people. The more people that like it, comment, subscribe, the easier it is for this video to hit kind of that YouTube algorithm, if you will, and get out there to more people so we can get this warning out there. Now, with all that said, let's go ahead and jump right into it because, again, a lot to discuss in tonight's video. So, taking a look at current satellite imagery, again, a very active situation ongoing. Still this front kind of stalled out into the eastern half of the country, and a trough that is beginning to now dig downward. That is going to help to pull Idalia out of the Caribbean into the Gulf and eventually into Florida and Georgia as well as into the Carolinas. Now, the one saving grace of this trough, although unfortunately it is pulling Idalia into us, it's going to help to also curve Franklin out here out to sea. So, unfortunately, just the fact that both of these storms ended up here at the same time means one of them have to hit us, and unfortunately that one is going to be Idalia, again going into tomorrow morning. So very active looking satellite imagery here to start off the work week. Now, as for radar imagery and our current watches warnings, again, due to this stalled out front, still a lot of shower activity in the eastern half of the country from New Orleans all the way up through Atlanta, Charlotte, Raleigh, Greensboro, and even up into sections of the Delmarva. So again, a lot of rain ongoing due to this front that is stalled out, and will only begin to worsen as we go through the next couple of days. And as you can tell down here along the Gulf Coast, Florida is just covered in watches and warnings right now, including hurricane watches, as well as storm surge watches that will, be very important as Idalia comes ashore, bringing potentially up to 12 feet of storm surge, which is something that, quite frankly, you really just can't survive if you're there on the beaches. So, again, very important that we get this warning out. So, very quickly touching on really going into tonight and tomorrow as for what we're expecting. All these showers and storms that we're seeing in the southeast will continue through the overnight hours, likely though dwindling down a little bit as the sun goes down and once we really get past the midnight hour. So once we go into our rush hour tomorrow morning, again, still some scattered showers, especially up here kind of, I think, into the northeast, coming ashore from the Atlantic, as well as still some scattered showers into the southeast. Now, tomorrow morning, as we get into our Tuesday afternoon, Idalia will be getting very close to the Florida coastline here, and as it does that, a lot of that wraparound moisture kind of backing up into this front that is stalled out here will help to once again cause very scattered showers and storms tomorrow afternoon. Another very important caveat to that we're going to worry about tomorrow afternoon as Idalia nears is some of those outer bands working their way into Florida itself. So tomorrow, pretty big tornado threat for some of our folks down there in Florida, and we'll discuss that a little bit more later on here. But as these feeder bands move inland, that's when things are really going to begin to go downhill tomorrow afternoon and only worsen into Wednesday. So again, that's what we're expecting over kind of the next couple of days here, really the next 24 hours more than anything. Alrighty, so taking a look here at satellite imagery and kind of really diving in on Idalia here. Quickly, we'll mention this is Franklin up here, and what a beast of a hurricane Franklin is this afternoon. I believe Category 4 currently. Luckily, he's not aiming for anybody specifically, and will really just kind of stay out of sea. Now, looking back at our main threat here, Idalia, looking at satellite imagery, not the prettiest picture, but definitely you can tell that this storm is organizing. That, low-level center right here, just barely south west of Cuba there, and this kind of shrimp tail behind it telling us Idalia is beginning to get its act together. We're also beginning to see a little bit of convection kind of here on the northern end of it. So right now, Idalia is very kind of southern and easterly tilted, so a lot of, a whole lot of nothing on this side of Idalia right now. And as we go through the next couple of hours into tonight, and by the time we wake up tomorrow morning, I would expect to see a much more organized storm out here over the southern Gulf, likely with pretty well-defined banding all around it, as it really begins to tap into that very warm, moist water, as well as very honestly impressive lack of wind shear, as well as plenty of moist air also working into the region. So Again, a lot of factors here that are going to help Idalia strengthen very quickly, and unfortunately likely to major hurricane status even going into tomorrow afternoon and overnight. All right, so this is the latest track we have from the National Hurricane Center. The latest cone here, again, pretty self-explanatory. We were expecting Idalia to go within these borders here, and you see this every year, or every hurricane season, a new track, the cone of uncertainty. I'm sure you hear plenty about. Again, right now, landfall looks to go right into the Big Bend of Florida. After that, tracking through southern Georgia, specifically southeastern Georgia, kind of through the Savannah area, and then eventually, potentially as far north as Columbia, South Carolina, as far south as a good 100 miles offshore of Charleston, South Carolina. Now, as for where this ends up, once we get pretty far inland into Georgia and the Carolinas, is going to have a very big impact on the weather in the Carolinas going into this weekend and into the middle of this week, and what kind of impacts we're going to see out of this storm system. Now, talking about intensity here right now, this is 36 hours from now. This would be 1 a.m. Wednesday morning as this hurricane, at the time it will be, begins to approach land. National Hurricane Center expecting sustained winds up to 120 miles an hour and gusts up to 150 miles an hour. So that is major hurricane status, and unfortunately, as Florida is all too familiar with, these major hurricanes are extremely destructive and unfortunately in some cases catastrophic to local life and property, and unfortunately all indications are that will very much be the case for at least some community here into the Big Bend of Florida. Now, as this moves further inland, we're still expecting at least tropical storm conditions as it's over southern South Carolina, potentially winds still up to 60 miles an hour. That's severe thunderstorm criteria, but on a much larger scale than an average severe thunderstorm. So for us folks down here into the low country of South Carolina, into extreme southeastern Georgia, and even into the sandhills of North Carolina, be prepared for power outages, be prepared for flooding, and even be prepared for the risk of a tornado or two before, hopefully, by the time we get into kind of the afternoon time period on Thursday, the storm really begins to work offshore, and by the time we get into our Friday is really offshore and things will begin to improve. All right, so latest spaghetti models, everyone's favorite thing to look at this time of year. Pretty good consensus here. Again, right here onto the Big Bend of Florida is where we're expecting landfall, then tracking into southeastern Georgia, and likely right over, if not maybe a little bit inland of the Charleston and Beaufort area of South Carolina, before then eventually kind of exiting back out over the Atlantic somewhere near Wilmington or Myrtle Beach. So that's the current track right now, and the good news is, once this gets offshore, it is likely history for just about everyone and should continue back out into the open Atlantic, not bothering anybody. So that is the hope, at least. All right, so looking at that arrival of winds, looking at tropical storm force winds arrival, again, could be as early as 24 hours from now. We could see those tropical storm force winds sustained begin to work their way into Florida, into the Tampa area, into communities north of there, into kind of that Big Bend region of Florida. And by the time we get into really overnight Tuesday into Wednesday is when things really go downhill, and that's when the hurricane force winds will likely begin to work on into Florida here. And, going into the day Wednesday, those winds still whipping through southern Georgia at that point and even into coastal South Carolina throughout the day Wednesday before finally clearing out by the time we get into our Thursday. Most of the wind portion of the storm should begin to die down. Now, taking a look at storm surge, again, a very important factor here, obviously, and really the most deadly factor that we have with most hurricanes, worldwide at least, is storm surge. In the United States, it's actually a little different than that, but worldwide speaking, storm surge and rainfall flooding are the deadliest impacts from hurricanes, and unfortunately, that'll be plenty big enough of a problem here in Florida. 8 to 12 feet here, just kind of north of the Tampa Bay area into the Big Bend, possible with this storm system. Now, as for Tampa Bay itself, we're going with 4 to 7 feet right now. The National Hurricane Center is potentially up to 9 feet, really depending on track. Now, if this comes a little bit further south and at a bit of a different angle, places like Tampa Bay could really have big storm surge issues. Right now, though, it looks somewhat manageable, which is some good news. As for our folks down towards Fort Myers, 2 to 4 feet and 1 to 3 feet down into the Keys. For our folks here into the panhandle of Florida, from really Mexico Beach to Indian Pass, unfortunately those communities all too familiar with Hurricane Michael that rolled through a couple years ago. Luckily for you folks, most of the wind will be coming offshore for this area, so we shouldn't have to worry too much about surge. Again, really the Big Bend area is where that surge is going to be deadly, unfortunately, for many different communities. Now, another place we don't have to worry about that surge is into Georgia and South Carolina, and even the northeastern tip of Florida. Again, as this thing is kind of moving inland and we're getting that very strong flow off the Atlantic, expect that surge to come in. A place like Charleston, South Carolina, 2 to 4 feet of surge, we know is plenty enough to flood that city, as it doesn't really take much to flood Charleston, and plenty of other communities here along the Georgia and South Carolina coastline need to prepare for that storm surge. So again, storm surge will be a very big deal with this storm system. The other big story, of course, is going to be that rainfall, and of course this causes plenty of flooding issues for many people, just many people. If I could speak, that would help. So places like Wilmington, North Carolina, down towards Charleston, Savannah, into, again, this kind of section of Florida from the Big Bend up towards Jacksonville, a moderate risk of flash flooding as the core of this storm moves through. Very heavy and very sustained rainfall as this works its way on through. So places like Savannah, Charleston, and even inland up towards the Columbia area of South Carolina and other inland communities, kind of Orangeburg, South Carolina, and surrounding areas, flooding will be a very big risk, and even a slight risk of that flooding stretches well inland into the Appalachian chain back towards Knoxville, Chattanooga, and other surrounding areas. So again, flooding will also be a very big deal. And of course, this will be very dependent on that track. If it does go kind of right over Charleston, then this track for flooding will be, will validate very well. If this track were to go a little bit further inland and go over a place like Augusta or Columbia, shift all of this upward. So communities like Columbia, Charlotte, Greenville, Spartanburg, Raleigh, Durham could then be in the crosshairs for some of that major flooding. So again, we'll really have to watch this over the next couple of days. So looking at the Weather Prediction Center's forecast for rainfall totals, again, widespread half a foot of rain here into the low country of South Carolina, into the sandhills of North Carolina, and kind of just through this stretch that the core of Idalia will go through. So again, at that point, flooding will become a very large concern. The further inland we go, a little bit of a better scenario. A place like Charlotte, honestly, could get more rain from just the storms tonight and tomorrow than this hurricane itself. Again, all depending on track. If this track just shifts a little inland, all of this shifts with it, and it's going to be such a fine cutoff just due to the way that these hurricanes kind of work in the atmosphere. So again, this map will verify very well, although it could shift one way or the other, but nonetheless, we will have a very big swath, very heavy wind, very heavy rainfall. All right, so another threat, and again, I feel like every tab we go, there's just another threat to worry about here. I promise I'll give you some good news at the end of the video, is a tornado threat. So tomorrow, again, as these feeder bands kind of begin to work inland, as some of these, again, kind of push up from the side of this hurricane here, with plenty of wind shear in the atmosphere and plenty of unstable air that these hurricanes bring, we do have a tornado threat. So 5% chance of a tornado within a 25-mile radius for major places like Tampa, up and down the coast from Tampa as well. And even that 2% risk goes all the way from Fort Myers, who also had a very impressive tornado, I believe, last year, and up into kind of the east coast towards Jacksonville, Florida. So again, tornadoes will also be a threat tomorrow as this begins to move ashore. Going into our Wednesday, once again, another tornado threat, specifically for the Carolina coastline and the Georgia coastline, and even into kind of northeastern Florida there through Jacksonville as well. Again, tornadoes and damaging winds will be the main threat here with these squall lines that roll on through. Alrighty, so those are all the things we have to worry about. Let's go ahead and break this down for you with some radar imagery on what we're expecting. This is actually a new model launched by NOAA, and I think it's doing a pretty good job with its forecast compared to a lot of other models. I think this is a pretty good center point, so we'll give it a shot here. And we'll go ahead and move this forward. So going into tomorrow afternoon, again, I'll try to kind of draw this out for you. This is the Florida coastline. This is Tampa. This is kind of down towards Fort Myers. You'll notice, though, some of these outside bands begin to work on in as early as tomorrow afternoon, and that's when that tornado threat, as well as those tropical storm force winds, will begin. Now, going into the overnight hours of tomorrow is when things will really begin to go downhill in a place like Tampa. Again, a lot of these outside feeder bands working their way in, bringing plenty of wind, a tornado threat as well, and of course, plenty of heavy rainfall. Now, again, this will continue to work towards the Big Bend area, and much of northern Florida will begin to go downhill into the early morning hours of Wednesday. That wind picking up, that rain picking up, before eventually going near sunrise Wednesday, we have landfall somewhere in the Big Bend here with likely a Category 3, potentially Category 4 storm. So, again, anywhere kind of on the eastern and southern side of this is where that storm surge will be the most catastrophic, and for folks there, you really just have to pray that everyone evacuates and has a way to get to higher ground, because it's just so difficult to survive that storm surge as it comes ashore. As we go through the later afternoon or the later morning of Wednesday, as the storm begins to roll inland, again, this is whenever that hurricane force wind threat and tropical storm force wind threat will begin to materialize for you communities down here into southern Georgia. So Wednesday afternoon here, again, still the core of this storm, likely very strong winds, still up to hurricane force, rolling on through southern Georgia here, and those outer bands working their way into South Carolina at a place like Beaufort County, up towards Charleston as well. This is when that tornado threat will materialize for you folks on Wednesday, and again, that threat all the way even down into places further down south towards Jacksonville on the backside of this storm. Going through Wednesday afternoon, again, this will ride up, eventually crossing the Savannah River into South Carolina as we go into the overnight hours of Wednesday. And with that very heavy rainfall moving through the low country of the Carolinas, as well as very heavy rain and those gusty winds and tornado threat into the overnight hours of Wednesday before we go into Thursday morning. And luckily, most of the rain and most of the bad weather begins to move away outside of the Outer Banks, who now get in on some of that nasty weather, although not as bad here as, of course, we will see in communities back down south. And then again, luckily, as we go into Thursday afternoon, the storm finally pulls away and we see some clearing into all of those communities. And that will hopefully be the end of Idalia. And then, of course, unfortunately, it's only August, or I guess probably September about by that point, and we'll have to then focus our attention towards the rest of hurricane season. So again, a real gauntlet we're in for over the next couple of months. All right, so I did promise you some good news here at the end of the video. Now, this is unfortunately, we're sacrificing a lot for what I'm about to show you, but we do have some nicer weather on the horizon after Idalia. So as this moves away on Thursday, you'll notice we're going to get some pretty nice Canadian air to kind of funnel in behind this system out of the north. So that will be some good news. That'll really crash these dew points down, and temperatures as well, potentially only getting really up into the 70s and 80s for some pretty major cities. For a place like Charlotte even could only get up into the upper 70s and lower 80s for our Thursday afternoon, which of course would be very nice. And also, this is just kind of a nice way to kick off September and the fall season. Unfortunately, though, going into the following week, it looks like that humidity and that summertime weather comes back with a vengeance. So, of course, that's not great, but we'll definitely take those couple days of nicer weather, or kind of the calm after the storm, if you will. Alrighty, so that's all I've got for y'all on this Monday. Again, I know this was a lot of hurricane talk, but unfortunately it's got to be done, as this is a very dangerous situation. And again, of course, if you haven't already subscribed, definitely consider doing that and like the video if you like it. Again, though, have a great rest of your Monday night, and I will see you all tomorrow.